Good morning, gentlemen. How are we doing today? Well, first and foremost, I have to apologize. I forgot the coffee, so you have to leave your grumpiness till the end of the meeting here. But next month, we will be going back to the coffee, and I'm going to grab some rolls here for us. So it looks like we got a tremendous crowd today. Let me start off by saying God is great. Amen, right? And so on my mind this week, I talked to Brother Nate, and I just said, I know just this weather's been crazy, but let's look at the good news here. And the good news is we're talking about the weather again, right? Because we've had so many other things that have been on our mind and on our hearts, and it's just been all this heaviness, and it feels like you're just walking through frozen syrup all day long, right? And we're linear. We're getting in our cars, and we're getting out of our cars. We're just kind of like robots doing our thing every day. So, but I'm also eternally amazed at the greatness that I see in the men of our community and how hard they're working. And I'm at my office every day, and I look across the street or drive downtown. I see people in their offices. I see people getting on ladders. I see people hammering nails in, and the work is getting done. And so eternally proud. And God has everything to do with that because you have the faith in yourself and the faith in your families. And so what's been on my mind this week is what'd you learn this last year? What'd you learn about yourself? What did we learn about each other? Did we learn how fragile we are? I sure did. Did we learn that we can be selfish at times? Did we learn to listen to other people's problems better? Or did we learn to listen to our problems better? There's only one way out of all this, right? Does anyone know? How do we get back? What does back look like? How do we get out of this? What is this? Right? We know it's a strange time, it's a crazy time, but there's one thing that's flowing through everything, and that is the truth. The truth will never change. Just like I say, when you spot quality, don't question it. God is quality. God is eternal life. The only way out is God. The only way out. Now, I asked Nate, I said, what's the only way out? He said, the immunization. Now, not a one of us looking for the forest has tripped over the log on the way in, right? So, very excited about today. Just a reminder for those of you that are joining us for the first time, Oxstrong is a group of men that have come together in the glory of God. We are interdenominational, so we have representations from churches all across the community. We have obviously men in here that are fathers and sons and brothers and husbands, and we're here about building the leadership. And God is our boss, right? And Jesus will show us the way because he is the light, and he will guide our path. And so I'm just so proud to have you guys here today. Those are my quick announcements. I'll turn it over to Brother Nate, and he's going to lead us into our charge here today.
First of all, thanks for everyone coming out this cold morning. Appreciate you being here and supporting Matt and him bringing the challenge to us today. And I'm thankful for the Newton crowd. There's been quite a few Newton people, if you haven't noticed, in the last few months that have been attending, and very thankful for you guys. Even seeing the need for your own community to help yourselves grow in Christ so you can take challenges back to them and encourage them to continue growing in their walk with the Lord as well. So thank you very much for being here and being a part of this experience with us. My family knows a lot of people within the community just through different connections and relations. And my wife and her family have known Carla Cowger for many, 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 many years, and they went to church together, grew up together, and through that, in Carla's marriage to Matt, gotten to know his family throughout the years. No regrets. Such a solid dude, and he's real, and that's why I really wanted him to come today, just to share his life story with us. And just so you guys can get to know who Matt is and what he's about. He teaches in Newton, but he also preaches in Newburgh at the Chester Church there and has done a phenomenal job with that church. It's gone from very few numbers to getting the house packed out on many occasions. And And that's due to Matt's faithfulness to the Lord and what God's called him to do. And so I'm looking forward to Matt coming this morning and giving us a challenge. So give me your best attention. Here we go.
Oh, thank you, guys. I really don't know what to say to all that. As Nate said, we've had a connection because of my wife, Carla. Calger is her maiden name, and later on in my testimony, I'll touch on that a little bit about how that affected me in my walk. So this morning, I want to share with you guys just my testimony, how I got to be in Grinnell, Iowa, how I got saved, how my life, just God directed everything. It's just amazing every time I stop and think about it. I was born into an Air Force family. My dad was in the Air Force for 24 and a half years. I moved 8 times by the time I was 10 years old. I was 3 months old when we first moved. And there was a lot of just inconsistency in that, and I always worried as a child. I was always fearful as a child of our moves, because what was it going to bring? Where were we going to end up? Where was I going to have friends there? What was it going to be like? And the one thing that I found that I really, really enjoyed was football. I loved to play football. I was a very hyperactive kid. I was an angry child, and it was a place for me to just let it all out. And as I got older, I had those visions in my head. I was going to be that next NFL superstar. I was waiting for a call back then from the Dallas Cowboys. I knew they were going to call me. They were going to pick me in the draft. I was going to be the one. Well, my sophomore year of high school, whatever, I don't know what it was, came up. And we moved again. And I moved to a town that didn't put a lot of emphasis on football, had a really good team that year. They were a basketball town. And let me tell you something, I am not a basketball player. Where's Sharp at? Where'd he go? My job was, Oleson, you got 5 fouls and you're going to use them all. And if you get the ball, you pass, you don't shoot, you don't dribble, period. And I told the boys, I remember, I think it was in middle school, I got a rebound, I made the basket, and my coach pulled me and put me on the bench because I told you, you only pass, you don't dribble, and you don't shoot. So I love football, and I moved to this basketball town. And one thing I realized my senior year, after the season was over, that I wasn't really as good as I thought I was, that I was just an average player on a subpar team, and I didn't know at that point what I was good at anymore. I didn't know what defined me as a person. And sadly, the thing that I found was alcohol. And I began to drink, and I drank a lot. And I found out I was pretty good at it. I was the life of the party. And people liked me because I could drink a lot of alcohol in a short period of time and still keep walking. My senior year of high school, right before graduation, I got in a motorcycle accident, broke my leg, and my original plan at that point was to stay in Kansas and go to school down in Kansas and party with my friends. My dad had accepted a position in Grinnell, Iowa at the old Certainty plant. And so here I am, no place to live. My leg's broken. What do I do? So I packed up in 1990 and I moved to Grinnell, Iowa. And the worst thing that could ever happen happened to me. I got a job at the Budweiser distributor. Now, for a young kid who has a drinking problem, that's a bad place to work. And it led me further down that path. And when I went to my first year of college, let me back up here real quick. I just want to point this out. Again, I grew up in an unchurched home, and I don't ever want to point fingers and blame other people for the choices that I made. My parents did the best they could with me with what they knew at the time. And I had this vision in my head because of what I saw around me as a family, as what I chose to get into, of what college was supposed to be like. And I see a lot of faces around here that I know, some older faces. You guys remember that old movie from the 70s and 80s, Animal House? That's what I thought college was supposed to be like. That's what I went into college trying to emulate. And so I got into a lot of problems. I had a lot of issues in college. And so after my freshman year, almost flunking out, pulling it out by the skin of my teeth with a 2.015 grade average, and being able to come back the next year, I wasn't really sure college was the best for me. That's what I wanted to do. And this is where God's providence comes in. This is where God's hand comes in. I was working at the Budweiser distributor, and I met a gentleman there, and he was a friend of my wife's from high school. And he says, hey, we're having a party tonight. Why don't you come on over? And so I'm sitting at this party, and I see this lady, this young girl, and I thought, man, she's pretty cute. And it wasn't my wife. That's a joke, okay? It's okay. It was my wife's best friend. And so we talked for a little bit, found out, we don't really have anything in common. And the next night, go to a different party, and I see her again. And we start having a conversation because, again, I wasn't smart. I did a lot of stupid things. And she began to, I'm thinking of the best word for it here, she began to parent me, basically, right then and there, because I was making some poor choices. And we found out that we were just neighbors, that my parents had bought a house just a quarter mile down the road from her parents. And so we began to talk, and I'd see her every once in a while in town or whatever, and I talked to her a little bit. And one day, I got the courage up to ask her out, and we went out. And I was a guy who was trying to prove myself through my conquests, from being with different women, from drinking alcohol and partying and doing all these different things. But yet when I met Carla, all of a sudden I knew something was different. I knew something was different about her. And for this kid who grew up in an unchurched home, who grew up moving basically every 3 years on the dot, and not having a consistency in that home life. I was born in Tucson, Arizona. Carla was born in Grinnell, Iowa. What are the odds that we meet and end up being married? And so as Carla and I began to get to know each other and begin to date, I knew within a few months that she was the one. She did not. It took a lot of convincing to get her to realize that I loved her and I was willing to spend the rest of my life with her. But more than anything, I wanted what she had. And I didn't know what that was. And she would talk to me about church. And one of the rules of dating Carla was that I had to go to church on Sunday morning with her. No matter how late I stayed out on Saturday night, I had to go to church with her on Sunday morning. And I did. And I would sit in the back row of that Calvary Baptist Church on Penrose Avenue every Sunday morning. We were home from school. And I would listen to that sermon. And I would sit there and I would get angry. And I would get mad. And I would my fists would grip. And we would leave that service. And I would just say, that guy. And I would just go off. Because I didn't like what he was saying. I didn't want to hear it at the time. I wanted to live my life my way. And so in 1992, I asked Carla to marry me, and we got married in 93. In August of 93, I'm still not a Christian. I know what to say. I know how to say it. I know how to keep people happy, all the buzzwords and those sort of things. And Nate mentioned some of the family members, and Leroy Calvin just passed away a month ago. And Doris and Leroy were so influential during this time because we would go to church, and they knew I wasn't a Christian. They knew I wasn't walking the walk that I was supposed to. But you know what? They never judged me. They never looked down on me. They never pointed fingers. They loved me. And I had an opportunity to share that with Leroy before he passed away. How thankful I am that there are godly people out there who don't look at us down their noses. And they love us in spite of who we are and what we choose to do. And so in August of 93, we get married. I'm student teaching at Grinnell Middle School, and Carla's working out at Grinnell Reinsurance. And back then, you had to get a physical before you could get a job in the state of Iowa at a school district. So I went and got my physical to have that on file. And I remember old David Ferguson, he turns off the lights in the room, and he's examining me, and all of a sudden he just says, we got a problem. And I'll never forget, he says, I want you to go see this specialist in Des Moines. This is on a Wednesday, and he said, the appointment's going to be on Friday. I'll have my nurses set it up for you. So Carla took the morning off on Friday, and so all day Thursday I'm worrying about it. We go in on Friday, and quite honestly, guys, I don't remember a lot about the appointment except I'm standing in front of the doctor. He's examining me, and he's on his little chair. And all I really truly remember is the sound of the wheels as he pushed away from me to go over and grab the chart. And he says, "Young man, you have cancer. Been married 6 months. I don't know what to do." And from that point on, the whole rest of the day is just a blur to me. I mean, I remember bits and pieces of it. We drive home. Carla's got to go back to work. I go back to school. I let my principal know what's going on. I call the people at UNI and everything. And Carla tells me after work, she says, "Hey, my Bible study group will come and pray for you." And I'm like, "No, I'm good. I'm good." Saturday, I go and let my parents know what's going on. And this happened on a Friday. Surgery's on a Monday. And Sunday morning, she says, "Let's go to church." I said, "Okay." And we sit down in church, and the pastor comes up, and we tell him, and he prays for me. And I remember just sitting there going, "That's it? This is it. This is my worst fear. I'm going to die. This cancer is going to get me, just like it got my aunt, just like it got my grandma." And I remember going home that night, or that morning, and we sat around the house, and we went out to lunch and did different things, and just having that empty feeling that something wasn't right. And so about 7 o'clock on a Sunday night in March of 1994, I looked at Carla after I looked up to our ceiling. I said, "Okay, God," I said, "if you're real, if you're truly real, and these people mean what they say, and they truly care about me, bring them here right now." So I looked over at Carla and I said, "You call your friends." It's about 7 o'clock on a Sunday night. And you know what? They showed up. They showed up at our apartment over on Reed Street, and they sat down, and it was a lady from Brooklyn and a couple from Kilduff, Iowa. And Doug and Diane sat down with me, and Doug walked me through the Romans Road. And the reason I tell all this is because I have heard all of this over the last several years. I had friends in college. I had roommates who shared the gospel with me, and it never made sense. It wasn't something for me. It was something for somebody else. But that night when Doug sat down and showed me the scriptures and showed me my unworthiness, he showed me how wicked my heart was and is. And then he showed me the love of God. He showed me what Christ did for me. And I remember sitting on that couch, tears running down my face, asking Christ to be my Lord and Savior that night in 1994. Now, Doug was a Pentecostal preacher. And he says, "All right, Matt, now we got that soul taken care of. Let's take care of this physical need." And he opened up to the book of Mark chapter 5, to read to me about the woman with the issue of blood. And it said, "Now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. And when she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, 'If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well.' And immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing to himself that the power had gone out of him, turned into the crowd and said, 'Who touched my clothes?' But his disciples said to him, 'You can see the multitude thronging you, and you say, Who touched me?' And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told the whole truth. And he said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction.'" And I remember Doug we read that, and he explained some things to me. And I'm sitting on this couch, and Doug's in front of me. My wife is on my right. Sally's on my left. Doug's wife is on his right, my left. Hands on my shoulder, hands on my head. Pentecostals praying for a healing. And nobody told me to do this, but I remember sitting in this one-room apartment on Reed Street, looking up at the ceiling that has no lights, We have nothing but lamps. There's no lights in the ceiling. And I remember just putting my hands up in the air saying, God, I can't do this. God, I am so scared. I can't do this I can't go through this. I've seen what this does. And as I said those things, I saw the brightest light I have ever seen in my entire life. It was as if somebody took a flashlight and stuck it right up against my eyelids as they were closed. And instantly, everybody in the room stopped praying. And Doug looks at me, and he goes, Did you feel that? Did you see that? And the girls are crying and praying, and Doug goes, You're healed. You're healed. Now, I want to back up and tell you, I've been saved 10 minutes, and these guys are talking about supernatural healings from Jesus. And I'm like, whoa, this is too much. I can't handle this. And they're going on, oh no, you call the doctor in the morning, you don't need to have surgery, you're fine, you've been healed. I'm like, nope, not having any part of that. And so I go to bed that night, we get up, we go to the doctor. This is what I remember from surgery. I remember laying on the table, waiting for the doctors to come in, and the anesthesiologist is starting to get antsy because he's like, man, I have a time frame. And he goes, I got to give you the medicine. He goes, I don't know where the doctor's at. What's going on? This is what I remember the doctor saying to me when he walked in the room. He goes, you have got a stubborn wife. And then, boom, I'm out. I wake up several hours later with my wife leaning over me. She goes, it wasn't cancer. They were wrong. They were wrong. And to this day, I saw this doctor again several years later and talked to him about it. And he says, Matt, I don't know. He says, I have no answer for you as to why it wasn't cancer. Your tumor markers on Friday were off the chart. Monday, when we did your blood work, it was perfectly normal. He says, I don't have an answer for you. And I said, but I do. I do. Now, I tell you that story because you think, wow, that just sent him on this great supernatural journey. No, it didn't. I started to fall back into drinking again. I started treating my wife just terribly. Our marriage was not going to last if this continued. So you fast forward a year to New Year's Eve, 1995. I get invited to go to a New Year's Eve service in Lisbon, Iowa, over by Cedar Rapids. I didn't want to go. I wanted to go partying with my friends. And guys, you do what your wife wants you to do, right? So I went, and we fought the entire way there. And we get to the church service, and I said, fine. I sit in the back row. Great, charismatic, dynamic Pentecostal preacher, sang, beautiful music service, and the whole time the Holy Spirit's just gripping me and gripping me and gripping me. And I remember holding on to the back of the pew. I was so angry. There was no way I was giving in this time. I wasn't going to do it. And then a little after midnight, we're having a prayer service. And I know there's people out there that say that the gifts of the Spirit are no longer there and that healings don't happen. And I'm going to tell you right now, I was healed. I was physically healed that night in 1994. But this night, I remember that preacher saying, there's somebody here who needs to get right with God. And he had pointed over to my side of the church. And I remember, honest to goodness, I think I knocked Sally down because she was sitting next to me, trying to run to that altar that night. And I remember standing, actually falling down on my knees at that altar with tears running down my face. And Pastor Slayton came up and he put his hand on my shoulder and he began to whisper into my ear. And this was from God because he said something to me that night that nobody in the world knew about me. I told you guys, I moved pretty much every 3 years, 8 times by the time I was 10. And every time we moved, one thing I would do, and I didn't know I was doing it at the time, is I would try to find my peace, my place, and that was always in a park. I would find the nearest park to our home, and I would go find a big tree, and I'd sit down under the tree, and that was my place. That's where I found my peace. And he whispered into my ear that night, he says, Matt, all those years when you were sitting under the tree, when you were looking for me, when you were looking for peace, I was there. And I'll never forget that night. because that was the night I committed myself to getting into ministry. And I had a pastor in Newton who got me into what was called Berean College at the time. Now it's changed names, and today it would be online. Back then it was all correspondent, and my books got mailed to me and everything else. And I began to dive into ministry as hard as I could while I was teaching. And so in 2001, I got a preaching license from the Assemblies of God. And I was traveling all over the state from 99 on, filling in at various churches, being an interim pastor, doing different things. And my daughter, Rebecca, was born the night I got my license. And I remember standing up on that stage, and the head of the Assemblies of God of the state of Iowa coming up and laying a servant's towel across my shoulder and praying for us. And you fast forward to 2002. Again, I'm traveling all over pretty much every weekend, a different church. And this is how God works in different ways. 2002, March. March is a bad month for me for health. The biggest things that ever happened to me, we had teacher conferences at school. And about the third or fourth conference, I broke the nose piece on my glasses. And so I called my wife up and I said, hey, I'm going to run out to Walmart and get my glasses fixed. And she said, well, come pick me up. I need to pick up a few things. So I grab her. We go out there. And those of you that know my wife, she's a cheapskate. No, I'm sorry. She's thrifty. That's what we call it. She's thrifty. And we get there, and the optometrist says, well, hey, his prescription is out of date in like 3 months. Normally, my wife would have said, no, just fix the glasses. And she said, well, I'm going to go get some things. Go ahead and do the exam and update his prescription, which was shocking because we didn't have vision insurance. And all of a sudden, she says, I'm dilating your eyes. And it wasn't a question of, can I die? I'm doing it. And so she dilates my eyes. She comes back in the room. She's got this Star Wars-looking helmet on, and she's looking into my eyes, and she leaves the room, gets my wife, comes back in, and she says, we have a problem. Now, I was just in school several hours before. I don't have any issues that I know of. I'm just here to get my glasses fixed. And she says, you need to go to the emergency room right away. And my wife, honest to goodness, looked at her and she goes, but I got a roast in the oven. That was her response. I got a roast in the oven. And she goes, well, go home and take the roast out and get him in the emergency room. That's how serious it was. And so we couldn't go to Grinnell. We couldn't go to Newton. Nobody would take us. I have an uncle who's a doctor in Des Moines. I call him. He says, yeah, we'll fit you in. Come on in. I get there. They do us an exam. I had a condition called papilledema on the back of my eyes. So my eyeball was pushed in. So instead of being rounded on the back, it was concaved. And he goes, all right, we're going to do a CAT scan. So getting the CAT scan, they're like, come back like 11 o'clock at night. And he goes, yeah, you've got fluid on the brain, hydrocephalus. He says, you can't go home. And so here I am. I'm stuck at Mercy Hospital on a Thursday night. My wife has to go home. She's nursing a baby. And so she goes home, leaves me in the emergency room. They don't have a room for me. And all night long, I'm listening to Code Red, Code Blue. This guy's dying. This guy's having a heart attack. All these different things. I can't sleep. And the whole time I'm thinking, I'm going to die. God, you healed me of cancer. How can this be happening? And I began to get bitter and angry with God. I didn't understand what was going on. And so the morning comes. My wife shows up, and they said, okay, we're going to do an MRI. Now, this is a story in itself. I walk into the MRI with, you guys remember Nurse Cratchit? She's still around, by the way. I met her that day at Mercy Hospital. And I look at this MRI, and they ask me, are you claustrophobic? And I go, no, I don't think so. And she goes, elevators bother you? And I go, no. She goes, oh, you'll be fine. And I'm looking at this too. I've got pretty wide shoulders. I'm going, does that tube expand and contract? And she goes, no, we'll fit you in there. That should have been my warning right there. And so they're doing an MRI on my head because the tumor that they found is located pretty much, you go drive a rod through my ear and down through the center of my head, right where they meet, right at the base of the brainstem, at the third ventricle of the brain. And so they put this hood on me, and you couldn't have shoved a piece of paper between my nose and this hood, this plastic hood. And as they rolled me into the MRI, I remember my arms going like this, and all I could do, I couldn't move my wrists. I was stuck. There was no way I was getting out of that machine. And the panic set in. And I'm deep breath. And I had a friend of mine who had shoulder issues, and he gets MRIs all the time, and he's a songwriter. And he told me, oh, I sing. Just sing. And so the machine started, and I'm singing. I mean, any song you could think of, any praise song, I'm bellowing out. And all of a sudden, she stops, and she says, quit moving. And I said, I'm not moving. She goes, yes, you are. The pictures are all blurry. I go, I'm not moving. She goes, what are you doing then? I go, I'm singing and praying. She goes, knock it off. I'm like, wow, this woman's nice. And so I made it maybe like 5 more minutes, and I pushed the button. I said, get me out of here. And she says, no, don't move. I said, no, I'm not doing it. And she goes, I'll give you something. I said, woman, there's not enough drugs in this hospital to get me back in that tube. And so they marched me back downstairs, and by this point, my uncle's there. I've got another uncle there who's a doctor, and my aunt who was a nurse. And they get it all worked out, and they get me into this tube again, heavily sedated. And they do. They find a tumor at the base of my brainstem. And I remember waking up and looking at the neurosurgeon going, here we go again. And this was on a Friday, and the neurosurgeon said, well, it's not an emergency. How's Tuesday sound? I'm like, it's not an emergency? He goes, no, an emergency would be tomorrow. He said, but Tuesday will work for you. And so that Sunday we went to church, and I remember I was on the north side of the church, and I walked up to the altar after the church, and I just got down on my knees. But something was different this time, guys. I was scared. But see, before I was scared because I didn't know what lied on the other side. I didn't know what was going to happen to me when I took my last breath. This time, I knew when I took my last breath, I was going to be ushered into glory with my Heavenly Father. I knew that was going to happen. But I got down on my knees at that altar, and I just bawled like a baby. Because now, who's going to take care of my wife and my 3 kids? Who's going to look after them? God, this can't happen again. You've got to heal me. I can't go through this. And the next morning, I went to work, Tuesday going for surgery. I wake up, and he says, yeah, you still got the tumor. There's nothing we can do for the tumor. They ended up, you can kind of see the scar on my head. They drilled a couple holes in my head, and they put a shunt tube in. I've got a pump back here behind my ear. Tube runs all the way down, across my collarbone, into my abdomen. I've had it now for 19 years. And I'm going to tell you something. It was a rough road because I was bitter at God because I woke up and I'm like, what do you mean I still have the tumor? What do you mean I'm not healed? What do you mean it's not gone? And every time I'd go in for an MRI, I would get more and more bitter with God because I didn't understand why he wasn't healing me. And then I remember what Doug read to me in Mark chapter 5. I remember how he looked at the woman and said, daughter, your faith has made you whole. And this I know now is that God will heal me in his time, in his way. In 1994, he knew that I was too weak. He knew I wasn't strong enough to handle what I was about to go through. And he chose through his divine wisdom to reach down and touch me and to heal me of that cancer. You fast forward to 2002, this time, he healed me through the hands of an incredible neurosurgeon. I mean, stop and think about the men and women who are out there, who have the knowledge and have the ability to perform these incredible surgeries, right, Dan? How many weeks has it been? 3? 3 weeks ago, Dan's heart was laying on a table. And they were performing open heart surgery. That is God using men and women to heal your body. And then I realized he's either going to heal me supernaturally, he's going to heal me with the doctors, or he's going to heal me when he takes me home. And so what do I have to fear? Because see, the woman with the issue of blood was fearful. She was scared of what was going on. She knew she was going to die of this condition. But at some point she realized this is my last and only hope. And that's where I was in 94. I knew that Jesus Christ was it. Without him, I wasn't going to make it. And when I looked up into that ceiling and I raised my hands to him and I said, God, I can't do this on my own. That's where I was. And so today, I've been married 27 years to the same woman. I have 7 beautiful children, ranging from 23 all the way down to 10. And here's the kicker. I didn't tell you guys, the cancer that they diagnosed me with in 1994 was testicular cancer. And they took my left testicle out. And the doctor said, you're probably never going to have kids. And when I got to talk to that doctor several years later, it was when my father-in-law was having prostate surgery. And I went up to him and I said, hey, Doc, I got a bone to pick with you. And he goes, well, what did I do? And I said, you don't remember me, do you? And we talked about the story. And, oh, yeah, I remember that. He goes, so what's the problem? I said, well, you told me back in 94 that I'd never have kids. He says, yeah. He goes, it's usually, 50-50. He says, most of the time you can't. And I said, yeah, but I got 5 kids now. And he says, well, I think I did a pretty good job then, didn't I? And he was right. So that's my testimony. That's how I got there. And I ended up in Newburgh. It was just amazing how I ended up there. We had been attending a church here in Grinnell, and Carla and I made the decision to leave, and it was a tough decision, a hard one. And we didn't know where we were going to end up. I knew I wanted to get back fully active in ministry. I'd kind of taken some time off. And we went to church camp up in Clear Lake that summer. A great time. If you guys ever get a chance to go to Iowa Regular Baptist Camp, family camps, they're amazing. And the pastors who we had that week were of God. God placed them there that week for myself and for Carla. And we had an incredible time of healing, and we came home. And I had 2 messages on the answering machine. One was really cryptic message. It said, if this is the Matt Oleson who preaches, would you please call us back? If not, just ignore it. And it was a gentleman from New Sharon. And I ended up, at that point, I spent about 6 months filling in down at New Sharon at the First Christian Church. And the other message was from Newburgh Chester. And they said, hey, can you fill in? So I would bounce back and forth between those 2. And there was a gentleman from Newton that we were going to church together at the time. He would do one Sunday in Newburgh, and I would do the other Sunday in Newburgh. And then about 3 months in, he says, hey, I'm going back to seminary, so you're on your own. And the church asked me, hey, would you be our 6-month interim? That was 8 years ago, I think. And I was a 6-month interim for a long, long time. And I remember walking away from our very first Sunday. And as Nate said, there was 29 people there, and 9 of us were Olesons. So that kind of tells you right there. But we pulled away in our car, and I said to Carla, I can't put my finger on it, but there's something special about this church. I said, I don't know what it is. I can't just say, this is it. And after 8 years being there, I can tell you right now, it's the people. We have I don't know if any of our guys wore their shirts today, but we call it the small church with the big heart. We love God and we love people. It's Jesus. It comes down to one thing. Years ago when I was painting houses in the summer, trying to make extra money, I remember working with a missionary Baptist preacher, and we would have these doctrinal theology debates back and forth. And I was standing up, we were both on ladders one day, and I don't even remember what the theology debate was. And I got so mad. I'm a young Christian, only been saved a few years. And I climbed down off the ladder and I said, that's it, I'm done. I'm done with you. He goes, well, what do you mean? And I said, do you believe that Jesus Christ was born of a virgin, that he is the Son of God, that he came to this earth to live a perfect sinless life, to die on a cross, to be buried in a tomb, raised on the 3rd day for you and for me? And he's living today, alive, at the right hand of the Father. He says, of course. I said, okay, we're done. I said, that's it. Everything else we will answer for someday in heaven. And I truly believe, and I tell my people at church, that someday we're all going to stand before God, and he's going to look at us and go, really? That's what you thought I meant? It's about Jesus, guys. It's about Christ and Christ crucified. And see, I think, I'm not even following much of my notes anymore here, but I think today there's a lot of you that can identify with this woman. You can identify with that fear, with that hopelessness that she had. Because, see, she was unclean. She couldn't be with her husband. She couldn't be with her family. She couldn't be around anybody. She was isolated. Does that sound familiar? That's what's going on in our world today. We're isolated. We pull apart from one another. But she focused in on one thing that day. She focused in on that one thing, and that was Jesus Christ. She focused in. She pushed her way through the crowd. And my question is, have you reached that place in your life? Have you reached that place in your life where you can put aside everything else around you, all the stuff that the world's telling you, your friends are telling you, the people at work, whatever it is, and focus in and push your way to Jesus Christ? Because it's hard. It is hard, but the benefit is out of this world. See, this woman right here, she wanted to go and she wanted to cling. She wanted to hold on to the hem of his garment because she knew there was something special. She knew that if she did this, something was going to change in her body, and she felt that change. And what we need to understand is the trials that we have today will become our testimony of triumph later on. You'll be able to share that testimony with people and say, this is what God did in my heart and my life. And see, that past that I'm so ashamed of the things that I did that I never shared with people before. That I had an old gentleman one time, he says, Matt, he says, your past is not bad. He says, you did some bad things in your past, but God will use your past to help other people so they don't make your past their future. And so we need to share. We need to be real with one another. And if anything, I know my wife tells me at church, I'm too real. I share too much. But I want you guys to understand that we are all in this walk together. We are all facing the same thing. We need to have that faith that God will, regardless of the situation. And again, He's going to do it supernaturally. He's going to do it through the hand of men and women, or He's going to do it when He takes you home to glory. That's our God. That's what He does in our hearts and our lives. One of my favorite verses of Scripture is 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone is Christ, he is a new creation. Behold, the old has passed away, the new has come. That is what God does in your heart and life. And we have to cling to that. And maybe you're sitting here today going, yeah, but I'm saved. I said the sinner's prayer. I go to church every Sunday. I read my Bible. But as you think about it, you're like, well, maybe everything's not quite whole anymore. Maybe everything's not quite what it should be. My job's not quite what it should be. My walk's not quite what it should be. My marriage isn't quite what it should be. My relationship with my kids, my family. God's here. God's here. He's here to change your heart and your life. So I'm challenging you today to be like that woman in the crowd, to push your way through. Because, see, that crowd, Jesus turned around and said, who touched me? They were bumping into Him. They were touching Him. But those people didn't experience the true Jesus Christ that day because they didn't have the faith. They weren't pushing their way through the crowd. No matter what, they were willing to get to Him. Have you reached that place where everything else in your life has failed and you have to have Jesus Christ in everything? See, there were dozens of people in that crowd. They all had needs. I'll guarantee you they all had needs. But only one person got help that day, and that was Jesus, or that was the lady with the issue of blood, because she saw her need and she saw Him as the only source. He was it. It was nobody else. She tried the doctor. She tried everything else. It was Jesus Christ. And she was going to do whatever she had to do to touch Him. See, it's not what you're going through, but it's who you're running to. You got to run to Jesus. And it's tough, guys. I fight it every day at work. I see the world around me, and I just want to go, all right, fine, whatever. But we can't. We got to fight. We're the leaders. You're the leader of your family. You're the spiritual priest of your household. Guys, we got to fight. We got to push through. We got to man up and be the men that God has called us to be. And so many times you say, well, somebody else will pick it up and run with it. Somebody else will take it. Don't be one of the people in the crowd. Don't be that one that just brushes up against Jesus and, okay, and move on. Be that lady. Be that one who pushes through and wants to grab a hold and cling to the hem of his garment. See, many of you, maybe you've lost your focus. Maybe you've lost your purpose already here today. But God has given you a divine purpose. Right here, right now. You've been assigned by Him. He has given you a path to walk. See, none of you, it's whatever negative degrees outside. Most people in the world will say, well, why did you even bother to show up? It's too cold to be out. God brought you here. You're not here by accident. It's because God has a purpose for each and every one of us. What is that purpose? Reach out to Him today. Reach out and just try to touch the hem of His garment, and He will. I guarantee you guys, He will answer you. He'll answer you through your readings, through your devotions, through a church service, through a quiet word from a friend. But He will reach out and touch you. Nate, you want to come and close? Thanks, guys.
Thanks again for joining us online. Look forward to seeing you here in the months ahead. If, Lord willing, you're able to make it here. But if live stream is the way to go for now for you, enjoy to see you next time as well. Thank you.